Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. I'm Gunner Eos, and welcome to another episode of the Logical Gamers podcast. I'm here tonight with Mr. BlankaKong and Mr. Esoteric, and this episode is going to be for all the old down, and for some of the young ones to laugh at us, and call us boomers. So, what do I mean? Well, Zeta Kaiser, who unfortunately isn't with us in this episode, brought an interesting article to our group chat, which we obviously will provide to you, our lovely audience, in the comments below. But this one is from Destructoid, and the title reads that a study finds that 87% of classic video games are critically endangered. What does that mean? What do I mean by critically endangered? These aren't like panda bears or something that they're gonna die out soon. But on the offhand, yeah, that's exactly what they are. So a lot of these games from yesteryear, they're becoming harder and harder to find as systems age and eventually phase out of being the main system from Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft. Their game libraries tend to also fade out. So what happens is, unlike films, movies, television shows, and music, the gaming industry seems to be slow or outright hostile to preserving these older games. So, for those that don't know, which this article does mention, um, another article mentioned, but I'll just bring it up, is that for those that don't know, the Library of Congress in the United States tends to document and preserve pieces of memorable media. So what I mean by that is that let's take Titanic for example, because with recent events, people have Titanic on the brain. Titanic is a world-renowned classic of a movie. Came out in the 90s. Leonardo DiCaprio was the main character, and a lot of people agree that is a classic movie. So the Library of Congress added it to their record, which means there is forever a preserved copy of the movie Titanic, where you can watch, you can request, you can see it. It will always be there. But video games do not get that same honor, right? When a video game and its system come and go, it's lost to time. And unlike movies where people are willing to preserve it and you can put it on different media and Hollywood won't necessarily come after you, video games don't get the same treatment. We see a lot of video game companies, Nintendo being kind of principal among them, that will literally threaten people with legal action for preserving some of their older games. We've seen Pokemon games being shut down. We've seen Metroid games being shut down. We've seen preservation on Fire Emblem games down. All these old games that exist on old systems that we don't know if Nintendo is ever going to do anything with are being shut down, and that only really happens with the video game industry. So, to kind of bring my whole little rant together, the point of this episode is we're just going to talk about this article. We're going to talk about how we feel about game preservation. How do we feel about essentially games from our childhood? Because a lot of these games consider classic games from the 2010s. And to us, that's like last year. So the fact to hear that games from that era are now being considered classics is freaking wild. And we're just going to talk about why is it that the game industry seems to be the only industry that is so adverse to game preservation, where you don't really see that much pushback from, let's say, the music or the movie industry. So that's going to be the gist of the episode. And now that I have my little intro and my little rant about, I'm going to disseminate it to my colleagues. I'm going to get their opinions on what do you guys think about the article, some of the major points that it brought up. Like, what are your initial thoughts and opinions before we get into the meat of it?
So I'll say this to start. Obviously I'm a collector. I have a pretty sizable collection. I had a bigger collection in the past, and I gave it away, sold it like a fucking moron a decade ago. I do regret it, but you live and you learn.
Yeah.
I know not to do that again unless it's like a life or death scenario. Um, and I collect a lot of games really because not to fill a roster or like have this big number of games, but really these are games I either played and want to always have access to, or games that I haven't played but I want to play at some point in my life. So I want to always be able to have it within arm's reach. Some people collect as a hobby to complete a you know population of a system, right? So like there are people who collect all Super Nintendo games, then they just want a full library of every single Super Nintendo game ever created just to have. Some people collect like myself, they collect because they just like collecting games and they want to play these other games. Some people collect for business reasons. They see a market in it and they collect and they flip online or whatever. And that's no matter your opinion, like those things are all fine because, well, that's just that's just the way it is, right? You have that option. However, as time goes on, that's going to become less of an option with newer software because of this move to digital. Um, and unfortunately for video games, you asked a question. I'm going to just answer it real quick. You know, why don't video games get the same treatment as movies or music or books? And it's simply because video games in the beginning were marketed toward children and were always seen as a children's toy. It's the same reason why toys will never be preserved, or that preservation. I mean, the toys are preserved. They're toy museums, right? That exists, but people don't look at that the same way that they look at like preservation of like historical documents or
Yeah.
music or anything like that. They look at that and they scoff. People look at video games and toys and go, "This is for children. Like, what are we talking about, right?" And that's okay. Like, that's just our society, and that's fine. I'm okay with that reality. Unfortunately, video games will never get that respect because they just will always have that stigma attached to them that these are children's products, these are toys. A PlayStation 4 or a Super Nintendo or a Game Boy or whatever, to a lot of people, to maybe most people, is no different than a pacifier. And pacifiers, there's no preservation for the different kinds of pacifiers in pacifier history, right? Because it's a fucking pacifier, right? And so people see video games in that same through that same lens, and I get it. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to listen to those people, but I understand their perspective and I respect their position. So that's I'll just say that first as like introductory
Okay.
kind of statement. I'll let Esoteric chime in.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on both you guys' point, um, yeah, the sole reason as to why games or the gaming industry are not preserving these items are simply because games have a negative connotation, as Kong pretty much stated. Um, it's always been something that was counterproductive. It didn't have no bearing on, societal needs. It was just something to pass away the time. And, due to that sentiment from a mass majority of people within our community, games don't get the respect that it deserves. It's been scientifically proven that there's a lot of improvements within cognitive thinking that's associated with games. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
that's true.
you know, gamers' intelligence seems to be a lot higher. They tend to be a little more diversified when it comes to certain things. Their hand-eye coordination skills tend to improve, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of studies that proves this. Not to mention, you're also kind of actively um, you know, building your imaginative, functionality as well, which is very important to, um, our livelihoods and reducing stress as well. Like these are very important factors that come into the daily life of people. Um, Also, a lot of these people within the community that are against games are not factoring in that, you know, um, there is an ESRB rating which has certain age groups for games that are associated with certain players. So a lot of these games are geared towards adults. So that only pretty much debunks the theory that games are just for kids, like it's a kid's toy. Initially that was the case, but not so much in this day and age. um we it's just unfortunate that we live in a society where majority rules, where if most people think that something is not feasible or doesn't have any bearing on improving and our overall living, then it's to just be tossed to the side. And it's just unfortunate that gaming falls under that category, which is why I think that um they're not taking the necessary action to preserve these types of games. Um, Also, you have the company element that also create these games, who are kind of limiting the production of these games, just whether it's to cut costs or to kind of like reinvent the wheel, right? Nintendo is very notorious for that. They'll bring out a game for Super Nintendo, and then it'll resurface like many years later on their latest platforms. Or they'll discontinue access to one system to acquire a game digitally, and then you know, which a lot of companies are doing currently. They'll create like cloud-based services where you'll have to pay either a subscription fee, or you'd have to pay to get to acquire the game, a one-time purchase, and you'll have the game permanently. For those of you who are not looking, I put in because honestly, to me, and I'm pretty sure the panelists before you, Kong and Gunner, can also agree with this sentiment. Like anything that's solely digital isn't, and that's not tangible, is not, you don't necessarily own. Like that's just my personal opinion. Um, let's say you have a system that kind of that goes kaput, because technology tends to be very fickle, and you buy another system and you want to download that game. If if the company decides to take that game down, you're SOL. Like it might be in
Yeah.
your downloads folder, but they might pull that away. Also, you might be forced to uh pretty much download updates for that game, and you might want to play the game in its bare bones form. It's a lot of finagling when it comes to digital content. Um, I tended to go off on a tangent there, but I think what it is, I think it's from the business perspective of them and reinventing that same wheel of content, which is why they're kind of like limiting the amount of production in games, because any of these companies can remake these games, which I gotta kind of be a little more give them a little more leeway, because they have been a lot of games have been resurfacing, such as Tales of Symphonia, Metroid Prime, etc., etc. um but you're having to pay a lot more for something that you've already had or wanted back in the days. It's just it's a slippery slope, guys, man.
So yeah, I think that you actually like kind of uh tuned in on something that's very important, and it's kind of something that is specific to video game, that that to a certain extent movies and music and books can't touch. Is the fact, it's the reason why a lot of these big companies and publishers are really so vehement and so aggressive when it comes to emulation, is because they know they can release an older property in the modern age and charge a premium for it. You can't really do that with a movie. You can't really do that with a book or a song. Like you can remake, for example, they've redone The Lion King, but there's a stark difference between the animated Lion King and the debatably live action Lion King, I guess we'll use the terminology. So there will obviously be people who prefer the animated Lion King to the live action Lion. When it comes to video games, you mentioned Tales and Symphonia. Tales and Symphonia came out for the GameCube.
Yeah.
And recently we've got a remaster or a port on the Nintendo Switch that is fundamentally the same game. So that's Bandai Namco being able to charge current gamers and nostalgic gamers a $50 price tag, because that's how much it cost, in order to get access to what is essentially a GameCube game, which is kind of hard to do with movies and music, because there will always be people who prefer the original and would want to go back to the original. But with video games, they can literally sell you the original or a slightly remade, touched up version of the original at a premium price. So that's why a lot of video games and video game companies and developers are so vehement against emulation, because if you preserve Tales and Symphonia, for example, I have no reason to buy your Switch version, and they don't want that. That's kind of like a video game, predominantly a video game.
Well, I would say that's also that can definitely be a point as well. But I think the biggest factor, honestly, because they do happen to do so with with music and videos. Like there's tons of subscriptions that you can acquire to kind of get your your movie or music fix. Such as Netflix. You also have HBO. You have a lot of like streaming services that have their own proprietary streaming platforms, and you also have the same for music. You have like SoundCloud. You have Apple Music, et cetera, et cetera. I think the difference between the entities that are movies, music, and so on, why they're getting preserved as opposed to gaming, is because it's more socially acceptable. you know um that's one of that's I think that's the main reason, because there's been I've seen a couple of movies in terms of production that have been like resurfaced. For example, you would have the old school Disney movies, the Disney animations that would be on cassette, and then they would kind of port them over to DVD, and now they're on Blu-ray. So they're still kind of like producing them in a sense, and people are buying them because they're receiving a higher quality. The same thing for games as well. But I think the only difference is that it's easier, it's easily accessible to acquire movies and those medias as opposed to video games. And I think it's simply because of the social acceptability of those particular medias.
Well, yeah, because video games tend to they video games move a lot faster than movies, right? So there's been only so many media that been on. It's been on well, as far as I've been alive, VHSs, DVDs, and currently where we are, Blu-ray. So during that DVD era, there are tons of movies that you have access to, and all you need is a DVD player or a Blu-ray player, because it'll play DVDs. Whereas video games, you have NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, Sega, Dreamcast, PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, Xbox 360. Like the video games there's more of them, so it's a lot easier for these games to get lost in the sauce and to just kind of disappear, where it's a lot easier to get your hands on a movie because there's only been a limited number of movie media. So like it's a lot easier for video games. That's why there's a lot of lost media when it comes to video games.
So there's a few points I want to bring up. Number one, to address Esoteric's point about why movies and music are preserved over video games, and there's a few reasons. Social acceptability is definitely one of them, but another one is, um, I think I can safely say majority, most people, 99% of people, at least in the Western world, watch movies and listen to music. These are low barrier of entry forms of media that anybody can engage in because it's very easy to engage in with, right? Music, you just listen to, movies, you just watch. Now, there's varying levels of that, right? You can be a movie critic and you can appreciate and watch a movie and have more appreciation for a movie than just a regular Joe Schmo, somebody who's just watching a movie, right? So there's varying levels of it, right? Like we could appreciate a video game's art direction and all these other things, whereas a casual guy who's just playing the game will just play the game for surface level, and that's totally fine. But with movies and music, it's just more. You're right. Socially acceptability is definitely one thing, but also B, most people are exposed to music and movies at an early age through their entire lives, whereas video games is kind of like an acquired hobby. It's something you have to get into, and it takes a lot of effort, and it's very purposeful. Like if you're a gamer, it's by choice and because you're choosing to do it, choosing to engage in it, and choosing to like get deeper into the hobby. It's a hobby, not media, right? That's the difference, right? Movies and music, that's media. That's just stuff you consume. Whereas video games you engage in, right? Same thing like card collecting or model building or whatever, right? Playing an instrument, like that could be considered a hobby, even though it's a skill, but you can conflate those lines. That's one. Two, something I want to mention about the article, because it's a little clickbaity, and I didn't say this in the beginning, I kind of forgot to. It says studies find 80% of classic video games are critically endangered. That's not true.
Yeah, that was definitely exaggerative, and from what
So
I gathered.
So what they mean by that, and they clear it up in like the second paragraph of the article. What they mean by that is 13% of the games ever published in the history of the hobby are currently available in a mainstream way. So if there are 10,000 games that were published in history, I'm pretty sure there was more than that. But let's just say 10,000 games were published from Pong all the way up to whatever the fuck came out this week, right? Only 1,300 of those games exist in a consumable form, whereas you could buy it online or you could buy it from a store. Whereas the other, 9,000 or 8,700 games, those are just lost to time. You have to go to like a specialty shop, or you have to download an emulator. You have to go through these extra steps that aren't mainstream to acquire these pieces of software. So that's not to say that like GameCube games are, oh my god, like somebody's destroying them all and we need to, no, they're available, they're out there. It's just, they're not being published. Like you can't find the Wind Waker at brand new at a Best Buy. That's not a thing anymore, right? So those are the 2 points that I wanted to make real quick. I know Gunner, you had like a point to bring up. I kind of like cut in front of you.
No, you're good. I mean, yeah, that is true. That is true. But I just think that if like I get it, right? A lot of these companies they'll say that they go so ham on emulation because they're preserving their intellectual property. And I understand that to a certain degree, but there are a lot of games out there that are essentially dead. And these like publishers, developers, they don't make it easier when they cut off avenues for legal purchase. Like just, a couple months ago, the 3DS store shut down. There is now no, I'm going to say, legitimate way to get a lot of these 3DS games in. Like you said, they aren't selling Wind Waker in Best Buys. They're not selling any 3DS game in Best Buys anymore. So now, what are your options? Your options are you already had them, so you're good. You you get them from third parties, which that's always a crapshoot, unless it's a Pokemon game. Then you're fighting with the guy on eBay or Amazon. You're fighting with his price, or to emulate these games. And Nintendo specifically, as much as I like Nintendo and I play a lot of their games and its main game system, they actively go after these websites that have 3DS emulators. And they will shut them down. They'll hit them with cease and desists. And it's like, I get it, but are you really worried about the intellectual property rights to a? I'm trying to think of an obscure 3DS game.
Golden Sun.
Yeah, okay. There you go. Golden Sun. Like, now, again, a lot of wild shit's been happening. Mario RPG is getting a fucking remake or a remaster. So it's just like, but are you okay? One that we know will never come out. F-Zero. What is Nintendo doing with F-Zero? Absolutely nothing. They'll reference it. They'll like Captain
Falcon.
I was gonna say Falco. They're like Captain Falcon in Smash Brothers, but they're not doing anything with F-Zero. So what does it bother? Like, it shouldn't bother Nintendo if I downloaded a GameCube emulator to play the GameCube F-Zero game. But Nintendo will continue to shut down these websites or try to shut them down because it's infringing on their intellectual property. While legally you might have a case, realistically it's just like all you're doing is just hurting the goodwill from your fan base because they're not making money off of this game. They're just doing it to preserve the game.
Well, okay. So, let me make my position clear because I might get some hate for this. I'm not a defender of corporations. Corporations are fine. They don't need my defense. However, I understand, and you said you understand too, why Nintendo kind of goes after these guys in a. I think it's a little rough. Like, I'm like, yeah, I need to chill. Like, these are your fans at the end of the day, but at the same time, this is a very small minority of their overall fan base and overall consumer base of people who do engage in emulation or even know how to emulate and how to data dump these games or whatever. There's only a few people that know how to do that, right? If we gather like everybody who's engaged in Nintendo consumption, right? They have a Switch or they have a 3DS and they play the games regularly. Out of 100% of the population of people who engage in Nintendo products in the last 10 years, let's say, I'm going to say less than 1% are people who emulate. Well, maybe that's too low. It's less than 1% of people who know how to like create emulators and create ROMs and do all that stuff. And then maybe it's definitely less than 5% of people who engage in emulation. So I think for Nintendo, it's like they're okay with not gaining or losing the business of this, let's just say 5%, because they know that they have the casual market, they have a very vast sea of consumers that will buy the game over and over again, and that's very clear with how successful the Nintendo Online, the offerings of the Nintendo Online, and how hype people got when they re-released fucking Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. Like, what? Like, these are games from like 2 decades ago, and people are hype. I get why they're hype, but it's like when you take a step back and you think about it, you go, wow, that's kind of sad that like they can flip these games that are like old enough to drink at a premium. It's crazy, and that's why they defend it, and that's why they go after these emulators, because or these individuals or these groups or these websites, because it's like, listen, they preserve their games. There's no shot. Like, Nintendo has every file for every little thing that they've ever created, released or unreleased. That shit is in a vault. That shit is there, right? Their games will never go away, technically. Like, they'll always be there. You know, right? As long as Nintendo stays Nintendo, they're gonna have their stuff. So they're not concerned about preservation. I think people who emulate and like, make this available to other people, I'm grateful, don't get me wrong, but like they're saying preservation, really it's accessibility. They want
Go ahead, Kong.
I was just gonna say it's accessibility. They want these games to be accessible at a fair, easy price, or at a free price, because if you go to the third party market, I mean, Gunner, you dealt with it. Like, you've been collecting 3DS games, you've been on a wild goose hunt trying to find all the Shin Megami 3DS games, and those games have shot up in value considerably.
Yeah.
Emulation is an option, but you don't want to emulate. You want the authentic experience. So for you, it's like that sucks that it's not available to you otherwise, right? At least not at a high price point. And so Nintendo, listen, who's to say that they don't have plans to team up with Atlas and whoever to re-release these games to turn a profit in 5 years? Maybe that's in the pipeline.
With Shin Megami, it's happened very recently. The third game, Nocturne, was HDified and released on Switch. That's a PS2 game.
Yeah, Switch and PS4, I think, right? So
yes, Switch and PS4. Yeah, not solely Switch. But that's a PS2 game. So yeah, who knows? Next year I might all these games that I spent. I hope not. I don't care. I mean, I'll buy both. I'm a simp. But yeah, maybe next year they'll drop all of them or drop some of the major ones for Switch, and I spent $70 to $80 to try to get some of these games. Some of them, fortunately, got the hookup, and I was able to get them at a cheaper price. But yeah, some of them I spent $70 on.
What were you gonna say, Esoteric? My bad.
No, it's cool. I was gonna say that I think with Nintendo, their method is we're gonna cut the hand off before it spreads to the arm type of thing. Like if it was a virus, we're gonna make a nub before it gets worse. So they're basically making an example out of these, small majority of people who decide to emulate their games and so on and so forth. Now, from a business perspective, as we all can say, we understand that. However, from a consumer perspective, majority of us has already consumed these items. Another thing too is we don't know what's in Nintendo's blueprint for them to resurface certain games. There might be some games you're more likely to see a Mario game resurface than maybe like Gunna said, a F-Zero game. Am I gonna wait my entire life to play F-Zero? No, I'm gonna wanna emulate it because I wanna relive that experience, because those games are very limited, and there's so many different variables. Not that corporations should care, but there's so many different variables as to why we might no longer have access to these games. Quantities tend to dwindle, i.e., at the time being kids moving, things get lost in the ether. Things break, things become obsolete. Not to mention there's so many different there's like limitations on product with like purchases of consoles at certain points. I'm pretty sure as of right now, looking for a Game Boy SP might run you for like maybe $250 to $300 if you're lucky. It's a lot of things like that, and then you cut off our initial accessibility for these games to only repackage it in a sense of us paying monthly for it. That is ridiculous. Like, most of us have already had these games, and I feel sorry for people in our generation because we grew up on this shit, and now we have to repurchase things that we've already had. As adults, things get lost. It's hard to preserve certain things. I've had a lot of GameCube games that I no longer have, excuse me, anymore due to whatever situation that happened. And again, for corporations, it's like, well, I don't care. That's not my problem. Our concern is to make a profit off of you. If you don't have it, then you should be more inclined to repurchase it. But then again, it's like, well, I can't purchase F-Zero from you. You're not creating the game anymore. You're not repackaging it. You're not putting it on the Switch. So I have to go to Joe Schmo, who has it, who is probably scratched the fuck up, and I really want to play this game so bad that I'm gonna have to pay him maybe 30% more than what the market value is of the game because they're greedy and they want to make a part, excuse me. Yeah. And then I have to, deal with it because you guys are not reproducing these games. And it's like another thing too, which is also not their problem, is that this would be a whole lot easier if we had systems that had more of a backwards compatibility. That's why I can appreciate Xbox, because I still have incentive of looking to acquire certain games, because the Series X goes all the way back to the very first Xbox. Nintendo can't do that because all
Yeah,
their
but not really.
it doesn't it
Yeah, but
has
not
limited.
really. So how it
Okay.
really works is because I have I have my Xbox Series X right here, and
Mhm.
I uploaded Otogi 1 and 2 as disc into
Okay.
my Xbox Series X. All it does is the disc is a key to the download of the game. That's all it is. It's not actually playing the content off the disc. What it's doing is it's giving you access to the downloaded version of the game.
But it's free.
But it's free because you have the game, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
it's not like it's not like backwards compatible the same way that like PlayStation 1 games are backwards compatible on the PS2, where it just
Yeah.
reads the game, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's like if in 20 years I still have my Xbox Series X, and
And they take it off.
let's say my file gets corrupted and I have the CD. Unless I have an original Xbox hardware, that CD is useless. I could stick it in this Xbox. If the servers are down for this thing, I'm fucked. I can't. It's just
Yeah.
a box.
And not
So
to mention you can't
let's
play it
that
in its.
distinction is different.
No, that makes perfect sense. And not to mention you can't play it in its original form, because if you're putting it in the Series X, you're subscribing to whatever updates are coming along with that download. So
Hmm.
okay, that makes sense. The more you know. But I mean, at least they give you that
At least that
option
option is
per
there, which
se.
is nice.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Nintendo, their hardware is so proprietary that you can't do that. In order for them to actually create a system, like they can't make a Switch that allows you to take mini disc, take different cartridge slots like the DS,
They
the
could if
Game
they
Boy
wanted
Advance.
to.
They could, but it'll be really bulky, really hard to manage for what they were going for, which is the hybrid, portable console. Um, so I understand that, but it's like
No, they could. What they could do if they wanted to, if they wanted to be charitable,
was remake.
is no, is just to have a device like on your Switch has built-in memory, and you can also put SD cards, right? Have a device where you can upload. You can just like with Xbox, right? If I have a
Mhm.
copy of Wii Sports and I buy the Wii to Switch converter, right? And I connect online and I have the copy of Wii Sports and I put it in, and they let me download Wii Sports onto my Switch, onto my SD card. As long as I have the disc, I have the
Mhm.
key, right? The problem
Yeah,
with that is that they can't, business wise, they can only monetize the converter, because I
Yeah.
could just give you my copy of Wii Sports, and then you also have Wii Sports, even though it's just one copy of Wii Sports.
yeah,
That's what they don't want. They're like, no, we have to control this market. It's our market. It's our IP. They feel like they're giving it away. So I get
yeah.
it. And
They
what
want
I
you
just
to.
mentioned will never happen. Like the converter shit,
They
that'll
want you
never
to buy
happen.
Wii Sports HD on the Switch.
Yeah.
Or they want you to have an overwhelming amount of games within their platform, and they want to charge you monthly for it. So I mean, let's be for real. Within my lifetime, I'm probably with my collection, I'm probably not going to be able to hit every game I have and finish them from start to finish, given my age, given my responsibilities, and so on. So if I were to pay for a cloud service that has all these games, I'm pretty much wasting money, because chances are there's gonna be maybe 2 to 3 games that I'll be playing
Sure.
and still paying like 20 to 30 bucks monthly
Sure,
for.
it depends on how you consume. So like
Yeah.
if you're a game okay, if you're somebody who doesn't have any games, let's say you have no collection,
Hmm.
paying for something like Game Pass, well, I don't pay for like I have Game Pass currently just because I got a free code for it, but
Yeah.
like I I don't like the idea of Game Pass because I like to own my game. Like I'd rather pay the 60 and be like,
Yeah,
"Yep, I have the game. Like it's
Yeah.
mine."
And I
Right?
think we're a
Versus,
very specific like
but we're part of a
niche.
minority, and we're niche
Yeah.
minority at that.
Yeah, we're a super minority in the minority.
Yeah, 100%. So, so a person who doesn't have any collection, who doesn't have any true attachment like we do to the hobby, it's fine. It's just like I will pay. It's just like if you want to go to like a club or something, right?
yeah,
And you have to pay an entry fee. You may like clubbing, or you might like this club, or the drinks that they serve, or the music that they play, but you may not go to this club all the time, right?
yeah,
So you might be okay with paying the $30 entry fee for this particular night because, if I want to go back to the club, I'll just come back and pay the $30 entry fee. So for some
yeah,
people, for most people, that's how gaming is. It's like, well, I want to play something and I want to try some games and I don't really know what to try. So, okay, I'll pay the $10 or $15 or whatever it is for 1 month, and I'll have access to all this stuff, and I could try whatever I want as long as I want within the time frame. And if I don't like anything, or if this hobby isn't really for me, I can just walk away, and I've invested nothing. So it depends on who we're talking about. We have to like draw those lines because it's important. There are different people who have different needs or wants or different budgetary limitations or whatever, space limitations. Not everybody has the space to have a game collection. You know,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's another thing too. So, what were you gonna say though? I kind of felt like I rambled there. My bad.
No, no, no. That makes a lot of sense. I was more so speaking from like our perspective and our circle in terms of like us who actually grew up on the physical media and it actually transitioning to this digital media and them having more control over, you know, how it's being marketed and so on and so forth. Like it's going to be, you know, unless I, you know, strike rich or whatever, and I have way more time on my hands, there's gonna be no way for me to actually consume all these games that I do
I agree
purchase.
with you. And the other point I was gonna make, just hit me. You said earlier that for you
Mhm.
esoteric, it's a waste of money to buy something like Game Pass because you might not play all these games, right? And one could argue it's a waste of money for you to do the game collecting in the first place, right?
That's
One could
true.
argue that, like, hey, well, you're just wasting your money either way, right? So,
That's true. But then it's the physical copies of my games have monetary value. I can pass it on
true.
to my future kids. You know, if it's something that they want to partake in, great. If it's something that they just want to sell to, you know, gain, you know, monetary assets, also good. Like I'm pretty sure the collection I have will some of it will hold a significant amount of value, especially giving the time goes by. Whereas if I just hand them a digital console, that if I hand them a PS5 with digital only, like they're not gonna get anything out of it but the console. Like that's it. That's all they're getting. They're gonna have an assortment of games, but they would have to, you know, take on the responsibility of paying monthly as opposed to gaining ownership of my collection. Because it's kind of like building a business and passing it on. Imagine if businesses were like just digital, where you know they go away if you go away. You can't pass anything on to your next of kin. You can't do anything like that. And I feel like that's what they're trying to do with games. They're trying to kind of eliminate the notion of physical content and just have pure game flies or pure
Well,
PSN
they're
and
absolutely doing that. It's not even the
yeah.
kinda. They're doing it because I mean, rumor has this. I mean, we don't know this for sure, but like the reports that I'm seeing,
Mhm.
because you know Microsoft and Sony are still going at it with the whole Activision deal, and it's leaning to Microsoft's favor. But what
Yeah.
came up in that court battle was that it was revealed that Sony is working on a second iteration of the PS5, and it's going to be like all digital, and it's going to have a attachable disk
Yeah.
drive. So
Yeah, I
that
heard about that
means
too.
this is another step forward to just digital being the norm, and us guys like us and consumers like us being just kind of inched away from the hobby as far as like modern games are concerned. So the storm is coming, and there's nothing we could do to stop it. Unfortunately, it's here as far as I'm concerned. So I think the best thing that you know we can do, and listen, the internet's a vast place. There's a lot of people out there that are more passionate or just as passionate about this hobby as we are. They're doing their part. There are servers. There are people who have servers right now filled with ROMs. Like there's archives all over the place, right? And once it's on the internet, it's never gonna truly go away. So like I'm not too concerned. I feel like it'll be fine, right? Because there's enough passion in the community that it can't die off, right? There are gonna be movies that maybe saw a VHS release that never saw a DVD or Blu-ray release. That's gonna get lost to time. There's gonna be albums and songs that maybe were released on fucking cassette in the '80s that we'll never hear again, and they'll just get lost to time. So like things that's gonna happen, and it's certainly gonna happen with video games. And there are video games that don't deserve to be preserved, quite frankly. Just like there's music and movies that don't deserve to be preserved. They're not necessarily good. They're just there, right? They're just a part of the population of media. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the article's a little doom and gloom. I'm not. I'm a little optimistic in the sense that I have faith in the emulation community. There's a lot of way smarter people than me who are spearheading this whole like preservation effort, and so I'm not concerned. I'm gonna preserve what I want to preserve for me, and the day I go, it'll just get added back into the wild and back into the rotation of the third party market or the secondhand market, and hopefully the future owners of the stuff that I've been collecting over the last few years, they appreciate it as much as I do right now. So yeah, that's my position.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think preservation will always be a thing. Again, it's unfortunate that these a lot of these companies kind of go hard on it. It's like, oh, it's piracy, it's theft, you're stealing, which is a thing. There are plenty of people who steal these games because fuck Nintendo or fuck Sony or fuck Microsoft. I want to play Horizon for free. I want to play Tears of the Kingdom for free. Those people exist. The same people that back in the day fucking had a VHS camera pointed at the movie screen and that's how you got booted. Like, they'll always exist. But I think for the most part, they're not trying to steal. They're just trying to preserve. And maybe they want to play it on PC because they enjoy playing it on their PC, but they end up buying like Tears of the Kingdom and then dumping their data onto PC to play it there. Nintendo would think that's sacrilegious and like you're committing a sin. But it's like no, they still bought the game. It's their property now, right? The physical cartridge is theirs, even though yes, you own Link, you own the IP. Let them emulate it the way they want to emulate it. It's fine.
Well,
But it's not to them.
I think
to them,
It's not to
fine.
it's not. Yeah.
But I think the reason why is because they can't determine whether or not someone actually completely owns the disc, as opposed to someone who's just trying to get the one up and not pay to support Nintendo. It's very hard to kind of keep track of that. You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
No, you can't. Like I could buy Tears of the Kingdom and
and I could
then
borrow it and emulate it.
or I could just give you the file. I could just give you the dump
Yeah.
in a zip folder and you now have the full Tears of the Kingdom game. So yeah, you're right. There is no way for Nintendo to kind of track who's being honest, quote unquote. That's a self-imposed morality system at that point. It's like, well, yeah, I'm playing Tears of the Kingdom on my PC, but I bought the game. So I still supported the developers, I still supported Nintendo. Yeah, that's just an honor system at that point.
Yeah,
There's no hard law.
But it's just unfortunate that it's an honor system that cannot be tracked, and at the end of the day, it kind of coincides with the monetary gain of that company. So what they're going to do is just prevent it altogether, because they're not going to expect everybody to have Scouts honor. They're like, you know what?
No.
We're just going to nip that shit in the bud and just not have anyone do it and crack down hard on it, because we don't have a system that allows us to determine whether or not who actually purchased the game from who didn't, and it's only going to get worse.
We will eventually. But
yeah,
I'll let you finish. I'll let you finish. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, because eventually everything is going to, as we all stated, is going to transition to digital, and then that digital print is going to be,
Traced and tracked.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
Microsoft tried to do it 10 years ago with the Xbox One, with the whole DRM thing,
Yeah.
where it's like, even if you have the physical game, you have to check it in every 24 hours to validate whether or not this is legit your game. That's crazy, right? And they got a lot of backlash for that, and that torpedoed Generation 8 for Microsoft, and they haven't recovered since, right? And so now people are a little more like, the guys who we're still around, but like kids who didn't know any better grew up in this digital age, and now they're like they've been kind of groomed into this like freemium era of video game consumption. They're going to be easier to accept it. And listen, I work at a game store. I sell these consoles all the time. 50%, 60% of my clientele that I get on a daily basis at both of my stores are digital consumers. Half, if not more than half. And that's not an exaggeration. I've done the math. I've tallied that shit just to see. I'm like, there's no fucking way. And it's true. They're taking over, and they're okay with getting fucked because they don't see it yet, right? They don't see it. They may never see it, and so that's just the way it goes. And the only thing we can do is try to preserve our stuff, right? I'm collecting old hardware, and I'm trying to preserve it so that when I want to go back and play a 360 game or a PS2 game or Super Nintendo game, I can do so because, hey, I got the hardware, it works, turns on, it's clean, done. I don't have to like bother nobody. I don't have to connect to no internet. I don't have to check in. I don't have to download a fucking patch. I don't have to do any of that shit. Just power it on and I go, right? And that's what a lot of these companies want to take away. They want the full control so that they can reap as much profits as possible, because the industry is only going to grow from here, and they only want to grow further, and in order to do that, they have to take back control from the consumer. So yeah, it's not going to change for the better, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's why I'd say, like, preserve what you want to preserve. I'm like most of us, I'm a special case. Like I could have had all these 3DS games on an emulator but I want to play it on hard mode or extra hard mode, and I wanted a physical cartridge, and I want to play it on its original system. I understand that's purely specific to me, and emulation's a lot easier. I respect it, but I don't know. I'm just hardwired in that type of style where I have to physically have something. It has to be tangible in my hands, count as ownership. I I can't really see an entire full emulated games and go, I own that. Technically speaking, yes, you do, right? As long as you back up and maybe put all that on like a hard drive or a USB, you'll always own it. But technology is fickle. One day you have it, next day it's all corrupted because of something happened. You can't corrupt my 3DS cartridge unless I drop it in the bathtub. That's how it gets corrupted. Um. So yeah, I think preserve your stuff. If it's considered piracy, fuck it, right? If it's like, I mean, if it's like if you're stealing like the latest games because you don't want to pay, that to me is irreprehensible. Like I don't support that at all. But if you're getting fucking Star Fox because Nintendo's not doing anything with Star Fox, but you're a Star Fox fan, yeah, fuck it. Rip that GameCube emulator, rip that Super Nintendo emulator, that N64 emulator, and go for it, right? Because Nintendo's not gonna do anything with it, so go for it. But yeah, I support emulation, even though I don't do it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're saying this at your own risk, guys. We are not, because we don't need Nintendo
This
coming
is
after
not legal
us.
advice, right?
Yeah.
And even then, the internet's a scary place. One minute you're thinking you're downloading Majora's Mask, the next thing you fucking downloaded a Trojan. So, just be careful when multiple.
Yeah, 100%. So Anyway, that was the article. I mean, we kind of like went off on a few tangents here, but I think the article was a little disingenuous in the sense that they made it seem like there was like this video game drought, and like the population of these games is like almost gone. Almost like it's not like the dodo bird, right? Like it's you could like if you want to find a copy of name anything, you can find it. Like there's a good chance you could find it,
Yeah.
unless it's
Granted,
super obscure.
Yeah, it's harder and it might be out of your wallet range, but yeah, you can find it.
Yeah, especially
Yeah.
now with like you could find emulators or ROMs for almost anything online too. What were you gonna say, Esoteric? My bad.
No, I was gonna say, also a huge shout out to companies like Limited Run, even though they haven't given me my collector's edition for Ninja Turtles, which I'm still waiting for, guys. Y'all said quarter two. We're in quarter two now.
Any
Um,
day now.
yeah, and any day now. But I have to respect companies like that because they're kind of trying to push the narrative of physical games and stuff, and still trying to revitalize that aspect of gaming. So shout outs to them. There are certain games that I couldn't obtain physical unless they themselves actually took it upon themselves to do it.
And
So
they're doing it. Companies like that exist because there's a market for it.
yeah,
There's
Yeah,
financial
exactly. Yeah.
incentive for them to do so. Whenever this publishes on the YouTube channel, this today actually they announced Tomba, return for Tomba and Gex trilogy on hardware, like physical modern hardware. Like we're gonna have Tomba 1 on Switch. I haven't seen Tomba since 1998, so I didn't expect that shit, right? And that's cool for us, right? It's great. But that again, this kind of like void kind of creates this new market, and companies like Limited Run could come in and go, there's a market for this shit. Let's make some old games for these like more purist gamers, and let's bring back some old IPs. Let's just get the you know let's get the licensing, and let's get the green light from whoever we need it to, and then we can make a ton of money with this shit. They make a killing, I'm sure. I'm sure it's very very profitable, very lucrative for them. Good for them.
yeah.
I'm not complaining. I definitely contribute. It does get a little muddy with scalpers kind of getting in on it and then flipping it for like
Yeah.
quadruple the
Yeah.
value on third party markets.
Limited
But
run for a
that's
reason.
That
yeah,
that of
but
themselves, they'll sell it at you could argue the price, but it goes like, where else am I gonna fucking get Tomba physically? Like,
Yeah, but then they're also taking in the cost of actually generating these games, so and paying for the licensing in which to do so. So I can respect the difference in what we would have paid for Tomba back then versus now. And they also take it upon themselves to add some extra trinkets like the remake of Dead Space. They got their own little collector's version where they had the helmet along with some other things associated with the collector's edition. So they're more tolerable. At the end of the day, by the end of the year for a digital library, which yes, absolutely, you are getting more games, but by the end of the year, you're paying more than a collector's edition that you actually wanted. So I don't know.
yeah. Well, real quick, you actually brought up a good point that I want to mention before we wrap it up.
mhm.
Um, Another good thing about game preservation is that even though games are remade now, some of them are not remade the same as their original
Oh, true.
It's
counterparts.
true.
So Final Fantasy VII Remake is vastly, I'm not even talking about the gameplay. The story is vastly different from OG7. You mentioned Dead Space. The Dead Space remake is at its core the same, but there are things that they did change. So I still want to have access to the original in case I'm not down with what they did for the Dead Space. I'm not going to get into it. If I want to play the original, it's good to have a preserved or an emulated copy of Dead Space and Final Fantasy. So like that's another aspect of game preservation that it's not really saving the game from not existing anymore. It's I want to preserve the original as
Yeah,
opposed to the new stuff.
you want
That's
to play it at its purest form, basically. I
yeah.
agree with that. I agree with that. And it also, to add to that point, it also raises for discussions, right? Because, the within our timeline, within our generation, the Final Fantasy VII we know was all pixelated. The story was, different or whatnot. So the conversations that we would have pertaining to Final Fantasy will probably be different from the generation coming up because they grew up on the Final Fantasy and that's been remade and they don't have access to the original. So, you're kind of altering historical games in a sense, like
well,
you
you
know
are
to
because
be
a 20-year-old now or a 19-year-old now who's playing the 7 is has no idea about the original 7. All he or she knows is the remake that exists. So if they were to look at the original, like, oh, what the fuck is that garbage? It's like, all right, it might be garbage to you, but this is the original, and I want to keep it as just like, hey, look, this is original 7. You have your 7. I can dislike it. That's fine. We agree to disagree, but I would like to have my preserved copy of 7, and I personally do. I have 7 and 8 physical collection on the Nintendo Switch. I had to import that bitch, but we make the sacrifice. But yeah, that's just something I want to touch on. That even if a game exists in the modern era, it might not be the same as its original, the OG form of the game.
Sure. And there's some good examples of like great remakes. Like Resident Evil 4 was an awesome remake.
Yeah, that's it.
Uh,
Yeah.
and then there's egregious ones like Chrono
great.
Cross and was it Chrono Cross? Yeah, Chrono Cross, right? They
Chrono
got the
Cross, yeah.
yeah, that got a really bad fucking remake that somehow plays worse than the original.
Yeah,
And
and it has
then
certain censored parts of
and
it
then some things
and
are
stuff like
censored.
that.
Grand Theft Auto Trilogy is another egregious
Oh
one where there's a
God,
bunch of
yep.
censored things in there. Um, if you look at the Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo Online versus like the original, there's like
Somehow
graphical
ran
glitches.
worse.
Somehow ran worse on the Switch on better hardware. So it's like, so it's a slippery slope, and it usually slopes downward more often
Yeah,
than not.
yeah.
But anyway, any other final thoughts before we close out and go home?
I think I said my piece personally.
Yeah, this is the proverbial back in my day.
It really is. I mean, this
Yeah,
is like it is. There's no getting around it.
we do one of these like kinds of episodes like once every 6 months. It feels like we do a boomer episode of like back in my day we had
Oh,
to blow in the
Grandpa.
cartridge. But yeah. Anyway, for those listening, apologies for like the derailments. Sometimes the conversation kind of went to different areas. But check out the article. Let us know what you think in the comments. Like the video if you found it useful or entertaining. Dislike if you didn't. Subscribe. We do podcasts every single week. We publish every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. We cover a variety of topics from opinion pieces like this, where we talk, we read an article, we talk about it, we give our takes, we do tier lists episodes where we just rank whatever levels, bosses, music, all sorts of things. So check that out too. We also have like other opinion pieces where we just talk about our favorite insert video game related thing here. We also do 2-minute reviews. We do gameplay videos. We do shorts. We also have social media as well. So in the description, you can find our Facebook, our Twitter, Instagram, our TikTok, as well as a Discord that we run. Mr.Esoteric, he runs the channel, the main channel on Twitch. So check him out there. The link is in the description. Give him a follow. He streams 2 to 3 times a week. He plays a variety of games from retro to AAA, modern games to indie games to party games. He plays everything. Check him out. Give him a follow. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you enjoyed the episode, glad for happy you've lasted this long. And well, yeah, we'll see you in the next one.
Till next time.
Take care.